Hey everybody, welcome to Comic Book 101. I am SuperBeard Vince Hoover, and I have a very special guest with me today, Mr. Roland Mann. Now Roland, we met at FusionCon, and it was amazing. It was a platonic love at first sight, I would say. It was a great time. But it was, Roland's actually a former Malibu comic and Marvel comic editor and writer with lots of history and stuff, so I'm looking forward to that. But before we get started, I do want to say a good special shout out to our sponsors at Comics and Hobbies. Comics and Hobbies can be found in Clearwater and Lakeland, and now very soon in Tyrone Square Mall, coming up next week. They have the best comics, statues, figures, the whole nine. It's not just a comic book store, it is your pop culture store. Everything you need is right there. Go see Craig and the gang at Comics and Hobbies. Also, don't forget about Cinema 6 and Embassy at 19. You can go down there and catch a movie for literally half the price it is to go to any one of the big theaters. You'll get treated like your family because it is a locally owned business and they love their customers. So go down to Cinema 6. I will be there tonight checking out The Mummy, which I'll give you a full review tomorrow. And also don't forget about Area 52 Beard Co. Beard Oils and Beard Bombs. You'll be able to go to area52beardco.com or go see Craig at Comics and Hobbies and get your own beard oil today. So Roland, how are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine. And yourself?
Awesome. I am doing fantastic.
So are we supposed to say pop culture stuff now instead of geeky, nerdy stuff?
Well, it's just, the reason he goes by pop culture is because he literally covers the whole gambit of sports memorabilia, toys. Like he literally,
people are kind of geeky, nerdy too,
right?
Exactly.
There's sports geek, sports nerd, yeah.
Right.
So he calls it a pop culture store because he covers the entire gambit of pop culture.
Right.
And now there's some there's factions in Star Trek and Star Wars.
That's right.
Even there's factions. So he covers the whole gambit, but it's great. So no, we're not nerd is chic now.
Right, it is.
It's absolutely chic. As we saw from MegaCon.
It was not when I was young.
Oh no.
But it's very cool now. It's very hip to be a nerd.
I got to come up. I grew up, I was born in '82, so I grew up in the '80s when it was not really cool. You still had to kind of hide your comic books. And then the '90s boom, and where everybody had comic books.
Right.
And then the 2000s where it died off completely, and then now it's coming back with the movies and everything. So I've kind of lived that nice little roller coaster with it, but I've never left it. It's always been my baby, and I've always loved it. But like I said, MegaCon. MegaCon was an amazing weekend.
I'm gonna make up stuff here, but I think it's the biggest show in Florida.
Well, it's actually the biggest show in the Southeast.
That doesn't surprise me. Yeah. Is it even bigger than the Atlanta Dragon Con?
Yes.
Okay, very cool.
It is actually bigger than Dragon Con.
So it's probably easily top three in the nation.
I would assume.
I'm guessing now. Probably you have San Diego, New York Comic Con, maybe Wizard,
maybe Chicago.
Yeah, and then easily in the top 5.
Oh,
though,
easily.
Right? Yeah. It's a huge convention, geeky, nerdy, comic book, media, fun. 4 days now. 4 days was they went to 4 days last year, first time I guess ever. Just if you're a super geek, it's hard to get everything in.
Yes, I can attest to that.
Now, if you're going for one thing or maybe like a couple of things, it's not too difficult to do and go and kind of see all the sites. But yeah, if you're like uber nerd, there's so much stuff going on. I mean, there's a lot of comic book guests there this year. And, for me, I wanted to see a bunch of them and talk to a lot of them and say, hey, I haven't seen this guy in 20 years. Let me go say hi to him, right? And I found it hard to get around to see everybody.
And you were away from your booth quite often.
I was away.
As your wife would attest to that.
That's right.
But, we had a great interview with Mark Andrenko.
Cool.
He was very gracious, and quick shout out to Mark. Thank you very much. I will be contacting you soon about coming on the show. But everybody was so gracious, and it wasn't like, I remember I went to Tampa Bay Comic Con a few years ago. I had an abysmal time. I really did.
Is that the year it rained so much?
No.
Before then, huh?
That probably would have been better because it would have kept people away.
Right.
It was like I couldn't walk anywhere. We couldn't get to see anybody. It was too crowded.
Yeah.
And even though Saturday was pretty crazy at MegaCon, it still wasn't nearly as crowded.
I think they actually widened the. I don't know for sure, but I think they actually widened the aisles a little bit. It felt like there was more room there.
It just felt roomy. It didn't seem.
But it still felt busy.
Oh yeah. It was a fantastic time. We got tons of footage. It was funny. I'm going through some of the footage as I'm starting to put things together, and I'm like, I don't remember seeing that vendor. I didn't see that.
Right.
There's stuff I'm catching in the background that I didn't even know that was there. And I'm like, crap. It was irritating, but
it's one of those that MegaCon is one of those that I usually say, if you are a self-proclaimed geek or nerd and you're not at MegaCon, I question you. Exactly. You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, you tell me you're a nerd, but you weren't at MegaCon? Nah, maybe you really weren't.
Yeah, exactly. I had a great time. Got to meet some wonderful people. Danielle Panabaker, she was amazing.
I know, I saw your picture. I'm very jealous.
Yes. The Stan Lee Q&A was phenomenal. I goosebumps the entire hour.
Yeah.
It was just absolutely amazing. Just some great night. Meatloaf.
Alice Cooper.
Yeah. John Snyder.
John Snyder was
Dukes
there.
of Hazzard and Smallville. Just a huge, the total gambit. It ran the whole way. Some great cosplayers. Charles Martinet, the voice of Super Mario himself.
Yeah.
That was amazing. J. Scott Campbell, Adam Kubert,
Adam Hughes.
Scott
Howard Chaykin, Scott Snyder, Mike Zeck.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was no shortage of good. Well, of course, Jimmy and Amanda were there, and everyone knows Jimmy. Certainly, and Amanda from the Harley Quinn stuff. They're really rocking Harley Quinn now. So yeah, there was no shortage of stuff to do, and of course I'm a big fan of all the indie stuff, right? So there was plenty of independent comics and creators there for everybody to see,
and variations. One of them we ran into was it's a podcast that they turned into a graphic novel. It was a podcast. Kind of in the D&D style of creating a world,
right?
And he got George Lowe.
Cool.
He's got
Space Coast.
Yeah, he got the voice of Duke Nukem.
Okay.
Just incredible people to do this podcast, and then they turned it into a graphic novel.
They
took the world and turned it into a graphic novel.
So did you see the graphic novel?
Yeah, actually the one that you would flip through, and you mentioned one of the guys' names, and I completely forgot the guy's name. Dan. Oh, he's one of the artists on it. Dan.
He's an artist who did the graphic novel?
Yeah. I showed it to you. I can't remember his name now. Now I feel awful.
Okay. It's 4 days of geeky fun, and you're asking me to remember one thing?
Yeah, it was crazy good though. But like it was crazy. It was just whole thing.
See, when people talk to me about comics, comics is such a small industry. I mean, it really is. And we look at the movies and we think, oh, it's huge, it's big, there's $1 bazillion in it, right? It's actually really not. Most comic people know everyone else. And my experience has been that the overwhelming majority of comic people are really very nice. Now, there's some, and no, I won't mention them, but there's some who you're like, I'm gonna stay away from that guy, right? Or that gal, because they're just jerks, right? But the overwhelming majority of comic people, creators, and this goes to like the entire support industry, from the retailers, distributors, and all that kind of stuff. They're just genuinely, I don't know if it comes from, it's part of our DNA, and that we love and protect one another, because we weren't always universally loved like we are now. And so we have that tendency to say, oh, this is a comic geek. He's one of mine, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's why. I'm just making stuff up now, but yeah, in general, my experience has been comic people are generally very, very good to each other.
Well, that was the other thing. There was very few people that were not gracious. I mean, there was some that were maybe a little too big for their britches.
Yeah, right.
That couldn't talk to us
unless you go through the right channels.
Yeah. There was a couple that were like that, but
talk to my people, right?
I mean, for the most part, we had no. I could walk up to anybody. I walked up to again, Mark Andrenko, huge name in the business right now, and just did this whole Love Is Love book that he was there to promote, and so great. Like, could have easily just been like, no, I'm good. No, he was like, absolutely, please, and. Me, it was just like, I would love to come on your show, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
I mean, this great people. George Perez.
Yeah.
I went to talk to him. Unfortunately, he had to leave.
Yeah.
Because he had a signing, but he was like, if I had more time,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he was only there for a very short time.
And George's always been very, gracious with his time. But he's having a lot of health issues.
Yeah. So he kept his time there short.
Yeah.
He was only there for the Love Is Love event, and then.
One of my highlights of going to Malibu was. I was always an Avengers fan from the day when Englehart and Perez, their run, they did a
Yes.
long run. And of course, I was a huge fan of Perez's stuff. One of my highlights was being able to call George Perez and say, "Can you do a cover for me for one of my books?" Right? I mean, getting to work with the people that I had idolized was certainly one of my pleasures while at Malibu.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up Malibu, because, like I told you, I'd like to really focus
Served
on.
it up for you,
yeah,
man.
no, let's segue. I'd love to talk about Malibu. Malibu Comics, for us that grew up in the '90s, was absolutely huge, and then unfortunately went away.
Yeah.
But you had characters like, and we had Dinosaurs for Hire, which I will always bring up because it's always one of my favorites.
Right.
The X-Mutants.
Yep.
You had Prime. The Ultraverse. You had the Protectors, the Strangers. Just all these great books that you guys were actually giving Marvel and DC kind of a run for their money at the time. Like, you guys were right up there. So much so that you guys actually helped launch Image Comics and all those things. You had Valiant, all these other independents that were coming up that kind of
Dark
helped
Horse
shape.
had theirs.
Yeah, Dark Horse and all that kind of helped shape that. And then all of a sudden, Marvel purchases it,
Right.
tries to retcon everything, and
Yeah.
very poorly does so, I would say. And then it just kind of died, and now it's one of those things that it's in limbo. And I've seen articles about Ultraverse 10 years later.
Right.
Now it's Ultraverse 20 years
20
later.
years later.
And we're still nowhere to be seen. But let's talk about Malibu in the good days and
Okay.
when it got started, and the kind of work you did as an editor and a writer there.
So one of the titles that I have to remind you of that a lot of people don't realize is that Malibu actually published Men in Black.
Yes.
It was one of their earlier, I don't know what year it was, probably the 89, 90, something like that. But my involvement with Malibu came from when I started my career. I was as a freelance writer. Excuse me. And so I was trying to sell a lot of, as a freelance writer, you kind of sell to whoever will pay, right? Will you do this? Will you do that? And finally someone says yes, so you go with them. I mean, I was submitting to everyone back in the day. Malibu is just one a company that I happened to click with, right? They bought a couple of projects of mine, and then because of that, I began to get more and more work. Cat and Mouse was the first one I did with them, and then I did stuff like Planet of the Apes. I did Lita Ford, if you're into music, right? You know who Lita Ford is. I did BattleTech, which which was a big FASA game certainly back in the late '80s, early '90s. So I began to get a lot of work with them just because I had a good relationship with them. As a freelancer, though, I'd say probably 60 to 70% of my work was coming from them. And so in 92, I began to notice I wasn't selling quite as many. I wasn't placing quite as many stories with them. And as a freelancer, you're just like, okay, well, let me just come up with something else. Let me come up with something else. And just it wasn't happening. It wasn't happening. So I started noticing this, but my relationship was still pretty good, right? So I saw one of the bosses, saw Chris Ohm, the editor-in-chief, at DragonCon, and I asked him, I said, I noticed I hadn't been selling quite as many, so am I doing something wrong? Do you want a different kind of story? He goes, oh, no, not at all. He goes, we love your work. He said, but what we're getting ready to do is we're getting ready to build a bullpen like Marvel had. We want to bring in staff, production artists and that kind of thing. We just want to build the bullpen, so we want to do more of it in house. And I said, well, if you like me, why don't you hire me? And he goes, of course, I'm from Mississippi. He goes, you would leave your beloved Southland? And I said, well, if the option is get no work or move to California and become an editor, yeah, of course, I would consider it. 2 weeks later, they called me with an offer. I couldn't refuse, and so I moved to California and became an editor. The titles that I edited when I moved out there were Protectors, the Dinosaurs for Hire, X-Mutants, all that became sort of the Genesis umbrella. And then Ultraverse came along. We'll talk about Image, right? But Ultraverse came along, and then the company decided that it didn't make sense to have two competing lines because they felt like the Ultraverse competed with the Genesis line. So they ultimately canceled the Genesis line, and then I moved over to edit in the Ultraverse.
So the Ultraverse, you had characters like Prime and X-Mutants and stuff like that, and some just amazing stories. And although it was very 90s,
Right.
in look and feel, giant shoulder pads,
Right.
oversized muscles.
Lots of pockets.
Very Rob Liefeld-esque.
Right.
In everything they did.
Very much
But,
so, yeah.
They had some, like The Stranger.
Mm-hmm.
You had just very interesting stories, very kind of unique characters that weren't being seen everywhere else. They
Right.
weren't. It was a fresh take that didn't try too hard. I guess that's the best way to put it.
So one of the ways that the Ultraverse was marketed was that this was a writer's universe where Image came out, and you remember they one of their ads was Image is everything, right? But you got to remember this was 7 artists who had jumped ship from Marvel and DC and formed a company, and so to them it was all about the art, right? Without quoting specifics, several of them have been known to say, well, they don't need writers. They just, they can just draw pictures and people flock to them. At the time, there may have been some truth to that. I don't know that in whole that is the truth. So they were kind of the art line. And so when Malibu launched the Ultraverse, it's kind of, well, this is the writer's universe. This is going to be writer-driven. It's not that we wouldn't have, it's not that we wouldn't have good art, because obviously we had some really talented artists working for us. But the whole idea of the Ultraverse was to be, this is going to be a writer-driven universe.
Well, it was great. Well, I mean, Image did go that route. Like, they even had a whole issue. I want to say it was somewhere around the 24 mark. They had a completely silent issue.
Yeah.
In the whole, every comic in the universe, of that universe, it was all art. There was no words whatsoever.
Yeah, just because they don't need writers.
And it was awful.
Yeah.
It was so bad. Like, like Spawn was just Todd McFarlane's sketchbook, basically,
Right.
at that point. And then you had Savage Dragon, which without a story, it looks, which I actually didn't realize how old Savage Dragon was as a character.
Right.
1982.
Right.
I didn't know it's as old as I am. But I was like, what? I thought it was a 90s thing. But all these things, like the problem was it was at the tail end of the 90s, so it was right as the crash was coming, so the timing couldn't have been worse for Image.
Right.
But I didn't know this until I did my research, that Image started under the Malibu distribution.
Yeah, so the way that worked, okay, and I'm going to get some of the terminology wrong because there's like official terms for this, and I want to say that the official term that Malibu was the publisher of record. So essentially what happened is you have these 7 artists jump ship, right? And so they know how to make comics, they don't know the business of comics. And so one of the things that, and this was primarily spearheaded by Dave Ulbrich, who was the publisher at Malibu, publisher and Title. He'd been friends with Rob Liefeld for a long time. And so he kind of got on board with them and said, hey, look, you guys don't have the infrastructure. There was just 7 guys, right? 7 guys who did comics. So there was no office, there was no home office, there was no phone, there was no fax, and this is the days of faxes. They didn't have that infrastructure built. So he said, why don't Malibu do this? You guys do books. We'll handle this, and this will give you guys time to figure out what you're going to do for an office, figure out if you're going to hire anybody, figure out if you're going to, and ultimately they did hire staff. They did hire some staff to sort of be Image Central. But I want to say it was 10 months. Don't hold me to the number, but for 10 months, Malibu was the publisher of record for Image, and it just basically meant we handled all their paperwork, we did all the shipping of their books and that kind of stuff. They still did all the creative stuff and all that kind of thing, but we handled working with the printers, which they didn't have any of that experience at all, right? So we handled all that for them. And then once they got established enough that they had their own staff in place, they left.
And they proceeded to poach your colorist.
Right. Yeah. So it wasn't. I mean, it was always known this was going to happen. It wasn't something like, oh no, Image is leaving us. No. It's we were there. And of course, from Malibu's perspective, it's like, okay, this is going to help us out a lot too, because everybody's going to know who these people are, and all these people are suddenly going to know, oh, who's Malibu, right? Why are these Image guys with Malibu? Let's check them out. So it was kind of a win-win situation.
And I do think it worked.
Yep, I do too.
And then one of the things that the Ultraverse did that wasn't really being done in comics, not even in Image, Valiant was doing it. Valiant was kind of the first to do it, but Ultraverse really was an established universe where all the
Right.
books existed in one universe. Because even in Marvel, people say, "Oh, they all Earth 616."
Is that the new universe?
That's the one it is now.
Oh, okay,
Yes,
yeah.
Earth 616. Yeah, the thing is like, yeah, they all technically lived in 616,
Right.
but there was X-Men stories going on, and
Right.
Avengers stories going on, and none of it correlated to the point where characters they didn't even know each other existed, kind of
Right.
thing, because it didn't matter. These writers were doing this, these writers were doing that.
Yep.
We didn't have to talk. Crossovers weren't a big thing. The Ultraverse was different. Everything in that Ultraverse was in a centric universe,
Right.
with tons of crossovers.
Yep.
And whatever happened in this, even if it wasn't a crossover, whatever happened here could affect this book over here,
Right.
which I thought was really cool. The other thing I liked about the Ultraverse, they were one of the first ones to really push outside of the comic medium. Like you had other shows, obviously, Batman 66, Wonder Woman 77.
Right.
You had stuff, the Incredible Hulk with Bill Bixby. You had all these things that they kind of touched on the outer side, but the Ultraverse had games.
Right.
The X Mutants on the Sega Genesis was a
Right.
fantastically
Yep.
awful, fantastic game. You had Nightman, a
TV show.
44-episode TV
Yep.
show, which I loved.
Ultra Force had a cartoon.
Ultra Force had a cartoon. All these things, and people are like, they
we-
did what
had
Marvel's
toys.
doing now. Oh, and some of the best
Figures,
toys
yep.
ever. Yeah.
So what a lot of people don't realize is that the Protectors actually had a line of toys. I don't know. I honestly don't know how far it got, but I know that in our office we had prototypes of guns and stuff that were from the Protectors line.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was very cool. Yeah, I wish I still had those.
Yeah.
So I have to tell you one little fun story because you talk about the thing that Malibu did that was different. So one of the things that we always like to kind of we liked to pride ourselves on is that Marvel and DC, those are old, they're slow, they're behemoths. It just takes them a long time. We were young and nimble and agile and quick, and we could make decisions and do things pretty quickly. So one of the brilliant things that our marketing department did, right, is they discovered how. Did you ever see the benches? Malibu did bench ads. Just the back of a bench. You sit down. It's the Ultraverse, right?
No, I didn't see that.
We had them mostly in LA, but one of the things they did is found out where the bench was that as you exit the DC offices and as you exit the Marvel offices. So every day when they came out, they saw an Ultraverse bench.
That's awesome. And that's how you do it. That is how you do it. That's actually pretty genius.
That's guerrilla marketing at its finest.
That's awesome. I'm gonna see if I can find images of that. Actually, I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Now the I don't know if find them the location specific, but you can find images of the benches pretty easy.
Yeah,
online.
that's pretty cool. Malibu was eventually purchased by Marvel, but from what I've been reading, is actually DC was really close to purchasing Malibu.
Very close.
And of course, the prevailing rumor is that Marvel bought it for their coloring studio,
Which
at
is not
Malibu,
true.
Which is not true at all. 'Cause
No.
like we've discussed many times over, for whatever they paid for Malibu, they could have easily for 1/10 of that
Easily.
gotten their own.
Easily.
They could have poached the color guys away, like Image was.
Like Image did. That's right.
But a lot of people believe that the purchase mainly it had to do with trying to just make sure DC didn't add to their library.
Well, I think there was a couple of things going on. Certainly, DC, the management of DC at Malibu, I'll get it right here in a second, had been in talks with DC for a long time. DC even had accounting people that had been into our offices doing the accounting stuff. What do they call it when they're trying to make sure everything is above board? What do they call
auditing
it?
and all that.
Auditing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were basically saying, well, we want to make sure what you're saying is true. And so they'd kind of been in and out, of the office. And anytime you see someone with a coat and tie walking through with a clipboard or something, you're kind of like, is that one of them? We never knew. There's only some who knew this was going on. And what happens is Marvel catches wind of it. So, DC is about to buy Malibu. So they fly out Ron Perlman, who's the multi-million-dollar, the Revlon guy, right?
Yeah.
I was almost this close to him, and I didn't have any idea who he was, right? But I knew there was something special with him because this was California in the early '90s. Our boss, Scott Rosenberg, was totally anti-smoking and everything, and of course I'm on board with that, right? But totally anti-smoking, and no, you couldn't smoke in any of the offices, and I don't remember if it was actually a law yet or not. But I'm in there one Saturday, and this dude comes, Scott comes giving this guy a tour. He's got a big fat cigar in his hand, right? I'm like, dude smoking in the offices? It's got to be something special. Now, I knew something was up because Scott would usually come around and introduce us, and he would say, oh, this is Roland. He's one of our editors. He does this, and he does that, right? He'd say some things and then introduce me. This time, as he walked by, he goes, this is one of our editors. So I knew there was something funny, but so there's that. They're trying to keep it away from DC. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that you kind of have to look at the big picture of Marvel. Marvel had recently gone public, right? They had been a private company for many years. It had recently gone public, and the industry was crashing, right? It was already beginning to feel sales woes. And so if you look at it, what happens, the CEO, the president of Marvel comes in and says, well, what do I need to do? I need to buy this, I need to buy this, I need to buy this. And if you look, he bought Panini stickers, he bought Heroes World, he bought Malibu Comics. And then what he's able to do is go back to his stockholders and say, look, I'm growing the company. I'm purchasing these things, I'm growing the company, right? Well, a year and a half later, industry's still collapsing. Sales are still falling, terribly, and so they fire the CEO, bring a new guy in. What does he do? What would he do at any other company? He's got to trim the fat, right? Yeah. So he goes around and says, okay, well, the old president who was in here, he bought up all this stuff that we don't need, so I'm going to start trimming the fat, right? So Heroes World is gone, Panini Stickers is gone, Malibu Comics is gone. We just got caught up in corporate dealings, and it's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. So had nothing to do with the coloring department. Yeah. Nothing to do with that.
So one of the things I'd like to talk about is the whole Marvel retconning and bringing in like a Black Knight and the Avengers and Hulk versus Prime and all that stuff. I want to talk about the Black September event.
Okay.
I'd like to know your thoughts on that and what you feel might have gone, what could have went, I guess the best way to put it, what do you think went wrong with it? Because it was very controversial. Mm-hmm. And what direction would you have taken it had you a little more say or pull on it?
Well, in all honesty, I mean, I was a part of it. I had a voice in it. At the time, we thought this was kind of what we needed to do. I think some of it has to do, in retrospect, I think some of it has to do with timing. You got to realize that every company was doing everything they could just to stay afloat at the time. I mean, there were companies. So this is where we get the multiple crossovers. We get the Wolverine in every book and Marvel, right? Because you put Wolverine on the cover, sales are going to go up. And we had several books that should have been canceled, right? But so, and there's other things that play in, like for instance, Mantra, right? Mantra, we couldn't license it. I say we, like I did it, the marketing part. They couldn't license it because certainly in the 90s, they would go out, licensor would say, oh, tell me about Mantra. Well, it's a warrior trapped in a woman's body. Oh, no, we don't want that, right? So they didn't want to have anything to do with it. So they couldn't license it. And so that had been an issue, over and over. But we had other books that probably should have been canceled based on sales alone. Marvel comes in, we get an influx of cash that we needed. We get the opportunity to use, because we actually wanted to use some of their characters. And Marvel said, why don't you take some of our C-tier characters that we can't do anything with, and maybe you guys can do something with. So some of the characters that were talked about, now, you got to remember this is the 90s, it's not today, was Thor. Thor was on the table, Submariner, there were Silver Surfer, there were characters like this that were on the table because Marvel couldn't do anything with them, and they were C-level characters at the time, right? So for us, the idea that, look, people know who we are now. Marvel, bought us. So now, in Malibu was a solid 3 or 4, depending on what Dark Horse published that month. If they published an Aliens, we were number 4. If they didn't publish Aliens, we were number 3, right? So there's certainly retailers that knew who we were, but when you looked at market shares, Marvel and DC was huge, and then Dark Horse and us, we were like way behind. So we had a long way to go to get to those numbers. So we were just looking for something to do. We were thinking to do in the sense of sales, right? Okay, if we take all these characters that these retailers now know because Marvel bought us, and we say, look, we're going to start all over again. We're going to have this event. We're going to fix some things that are broken, like Mantra, right? Not that Mantra as a concept was broken because fans liked it, but we couldn't license it, right? We couldn't get that outside money because nobody would touch it. So we're like, okay, let's fix this thing, right? And this is what the Black September was. There are people who blame me for the Mantra Black September, but the truth is, when this came about, I went to the writer, Mike Barr, and said, hey, Mike, said, we've got to make Mantra a female. Here's all these things. And of course, Mike, like any good creator, kind of argued his case. Well, you know, it changes it, blah, blah, blah. I say, oh, you know, Mike, the option is we don't get to, you know, we don't get to make toys of her. We don't get to do any of these things because no one will do it, right? Now, if this were done today, probably no one would care, right? But this was 25 years ago, so people cared.
Yeah, that character actually nowadays would actually be like a figurehead.
Right,
it would almost
exactly.
Be like a call to arms kind of thing.
Exactly.
You know.
So Mike said, okay, I'm going to see, you know, I hear what you're saying. So it was Mike who went back and came up with the idea. Here's how we're going to fix it, and you know, this became the new Mantra. Did it work? You know, apparently not. Apparently, a lot of people were very unhappy with it. I'm not sure there's a whole lot I would have changed if I were to do it all over again, because hindsight is 20/20, right? And it's easy for us to say, well, 25 years later, we have a different lens that we look at the culture then. If we could license Mantra, would we have changed it? Probably not. You know, there would be no reason to really change what the core concept of the character is. But because we couldn't license, and because that's where, as you very well know, that's where a lot of comic book money comes from. Our marketing department was very, you know, hey, we got to do this. We got to change this so that we can license this. Otherwise, we're going to stop even trying.
Well, I'm glad you talked about Mantra, because that is one of the most controversial changes from the series, from a fan's perspective. But we don't get to know the backside of the story a lot of times. We don't. It's not out there, especially in the '90s where we didn't have Google and stuff like that, to where you could hear about the licensing issues and whatnot. You know, fans don't get to hear about us. So they just get upset that this character gets changed,
and they don't know why.
And they don't know why.
Right.
Exactly. But
so a lot of that really was done in an effort to try to save the line, because the sales were very, you know, were low. Obviously, some better than others, but they were just steadily declining. And it wasn't just Malibu. Now, this was industry wide, right? But because, you know, Marvel books started here and we start here, when the sales decline, we're closer to the bottom than they are. So we were really grasping at things to try to figure out what we can do to bring attention to our titles and increase sales. I mean, that's really what it's all about, you know. Now, as writers, right, we want to tell good stories.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know that if you don't sell it, it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
So
now, it's funny though. It's funny because Stan Lee gave like his one bit of advice,
right,
and that was never write for a demographic, never write for a race or a creed or religion. Every story you tell, you write it for yourself. And that's great advice when you're Stan Lee.
Right,
and
it is.
Everything you put out there gets put out there. Because very next question, were there any characters that you made that didn't see the light of day? And he literally went, no.
Yeah.
He's like, no. Every character I've made has made it to the light of day.
Right.
Because I didn't put any effort in anything that wasn't going to be good.
Right.
And I was like, fair enough.
Right. So I love Stan Lee, but I don't know that anyone, and there may be some people, but I don't know that anyone is going to willingly say, I'm going to put an effort into this and it's not going to be any good.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to put an effort into something, you're going to attempt to make it good, right?
Well, I think what he kind of meant was that, because he obviously came on at the very beginning.
Yes, he did, yeah.
So it's built on him.
Yes, it is.
But for, like, say,
He's the
for me to come
cornerstone.
in right now, it's like, oh, you know, you're a great writer, come on in, you got to work on this project. I don't want to work on that character. I don't like that character. I think it's character stupid. This is what you got, or
right.
there's the door.
That's right. You're absolutely right.
So now I have to put all this effort into a character I don't like, that I don't think will go anywhere.
Yeah.
And then you get blamed when it doesn't go anywhere, and I'm like, I did what I could. But at the end of the day, it's just about writing good comics and trying to get it out there and trying to get it pushed. So again, the Black September was very controversial. And it wasn't just the Mantra. There was several other
No, there
things.
were several other things.
A lot of retconning.
Nightman had a split personality.
Oh yeah, that was weird.
Yeah. And that was all. So the sort of germ behind that. This was Steve Englehart's way of trying to figure out how he really wanted to write a Nightman in the Marvel universe. And so by splitting Nightman, he had hoped that one of them would go to the Marvel Universe while the other one stayed in the Ultraverse. And he really, really, really wanted to write the Nightman in the Marvel Universe. I mean, he was trying to get back into the good graces because he'd been out with Marvel for several years. And so he really kind of wanted to get back into the good graces at Marvel. And so it was just kind of something that came as a natural way that he had built the story. And, you know, as it happens, it didn't go over real well.
No, it then became Moon Knight, who had the split personalities.
But this was all Steve's idea. You know?
And I really do, if you go back and read that version of Nightman when he did that, and if you read the Moon Knight that came later on, very eerily similar. I'm not saying anything, Marvel.
Yeah. It's
Maybe
actually
it's just a
shame.
coincidence.
Nightman was one of the ones that was actually kind of on the chopping block. Because you know, as far as rank sales kind of go, it was you know, down there, and so we were trying to do, you know, I don't know if you noticed, we changed artists, you know, and we had to change artists, and I tell you, there's nothing worse than being an editor and say, okay, look, artist, the sales of this book is terrible. I've got to make a change, and you're the first thing to go, because art is the first thing that people see. And you know, the artist says, but I've never been late on my deadlines. I've never missed a deadline. You know, why is this happening? And you know, what do you do? What do you say? You're like, you know, I hear you, but as the editor, here are my options. Get rid of you and try someone else to hope to save the book, or just let the book get canceled. What do you do?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Well, I mean, it's one of the things, like, you never miss a deadline.
Yep.
You never were late.
Nope.
That's fantastic.
It is.
But if it's not selling, if it's not what we're looking for, it doesn't matter how punctual you are.
That's right.
Because punctual doesn't show up on the book.
No, it doesn't.
Which, although I will say Marvel needs to get on that, because you guys have been very late lately. Very late. It's not good.
No, late books are never good.
No, and that's what kind of killed the Civil War. Well, part of what killed Civil War II. What also killed Civil War II was the bad story.
Bad story?
It was...
So I'm going to segue back.
Yes,
So
segue.
Hold your thought there.
Yes.
You said something earlier, because this is one of my comic pet peeves. Okay, you said something earlier about I guess when Image was around 2 years old, something they did all the silent issues, right?
Yeah.
I say, that's a pet peeve of mine, because here's why. Okay, a silent issue, a comic book with no words, is what?
It's just art.
Well, let's define it more.
It's
a picture book.
Yeah, it's just,
okay.
yeah.
And do you have kids?
Yes.
How old are they?
My old, anywhere, they range, okay, so the spectrum goes 17 to 10.
Oh my goodness.
And there's 5.
Okay. So when they were 10 years ago, what would you read to them? Picture books.
Yeah.
You
But
read
they had words.
Well, yeah, they had some words, right? But you had a big picture and a couple of words at the bottom, right?
Yeah.
To me, when I see a comic that has no words in it, it's just a picture book, and I don't want that. I you know, because I can look through a picture book like this. Okay, I'm done, right?
Yeah.
To me, these things have almost no value. And that's not to suggest that the art is not good. I mean, I'm a big fan of art. I love comic art. I think we talked at MegaCon. I love comic pencils. I love to look at the pencil artwork. But when you have page after page of nothing to read, you're shorting me. You're shortchanging me. I've just given you $4, $5, $6, and all you've given me is pictures.
Yeah, and those were expensive issues too.
Yes.
They weren't normally. It was because in the '90s it was normally $1.95.
Yep.
And then it went to $2.95 right at the end of the decade.
I think it went to $2.25 first, didn't it?
Yeah,
I think
on it ran the gamut. I'm saying, like, by the end of the decade they were $2.95.
Right.
But those issues were $3.95.
Yeah.
And they were in '97, '98.
Yeah.
And they were like $3.95 for those issues, and you got them. You were all happy, and then you're like, I'm done.
Yeah.
What now?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And then, like, oh, I'll save it. Well, now it's even less. Like, and what was crazy was even the covers had no words.
Yeah.
It was just literally it was just art the whole way through. Like, they pushed it for months and did it, but
yeah.
I didn't like that either.
So I'm not opposed to, don't misinterpret me. I'm not opposed to picture books. I had lots of picture books that I read to my kids too, right? But comic books aren't picture books. And I want a comic book to be something that I can read and spend some time with, right?
Well, I think the worst part of it is those guys, God bless them, tried so hard to tell a story. Like, they weren't just one-offs.
Right.
They were actually all in continuity.
Right.
and they were trying to tell a story without a single word, and you're just like, whoa.
And when you're looking at these panels and going, I can't figure out what's happening here. You got a problem.
Yeah, it was rough. God bless Image. I mean, some of the greatest. Like, I loved it when it very first came out.
Listen,
you had Youngblood, Wetworks, Savage Dragon was one of my all-time favorite books. I had every issue of the first run,
right,
which was only 3 issues. And then when it became a regular series, and I mean, Spawn. They were all great books.
Yeah, here's the thing: these guys literally were, as much as I could sit up here and kind of trash talk those books, and I could. The truth of the matter is, those guys were trailblazers. They really were trailblazers. And if you look at the comic industry today, much of what's happening today with Image, with all the independent stuff that they're doing, is because of these guys, right? Without their willingness to take that risk and to leap. Now, these guys were all wealthy, okay? So don't think, oh, this is a bunch of poor artists jump out. No. They did the top.
They're at the top of their game.
They did the top and the top of their game, and they did the top-selling books at Marvel and DC. These guys got massive royalties from those books. Still, that said, these guys took a huge risk of leaving all that behind and saying, nope, see ya, Marvel, DC. We're going to go do our own thing. And now you look. I don't know what year they were launched. 92? What year was Image?
92 or 93.
So 25 years later, right? Image is still around and still going strong.
Well, not only that. I mean, you look at where those artists went. Look at Jim Lee.
Mm-hmm.
DC CEO. He's in charge of DC Comics, and that's after he left Image to go back to Marvel for a short time.
Yep.
And then got picked up by DC and is now the man in charge.
That's right.
Like, come on. Todd McFarlane.
He owns McFarlane Toys.
McFarlane Toys are some of the greatest action figures of all time. And he's working. He just leaked his new Spawn script.
Yeah.
He's working on that. Rob Liefeld, Deadpool. Enough said there.
Yep.
I mean, even with his completely anatomically incorrect drawings.
Yeah.
The thing with if you look at the Image books, again, 90s, everybody had the big shoulder pads.
Yep.
And, but
big shoulder pads, big guns, pockets.
Yeah, gun, like just ridiculous guns.
Yeah.
And then everybody had the utility belt style, and it came across here, and muscles for days. Yep. But when Rob went back to Marvel for the Heroes Reborn, which is where Marvel kind of brought the Image guys back. Man, talk about one of the worst things Marvel ever could have done.
Yeah.
You got to see, of course, there's that very famous image of the cover of Captain America.
Oh, man.
With
what a terrible...
He looked like he was in the middle. It was at the end of Beetlejuice, and he got his head shrunk, and everything else was fine.
And it's also twisted in
a way that's not anatomically correct.
Way,
I didn't get it.
Yeah.
But it was just a combination. It almost killed those guys and Marvel, because the Heroes Reborn was one of the worst retcon, whatever you want to call it, that has ever happened in the history of comics. Ever.
I have a feeling we've got another retcon coming soon.
You talking about Secret Empire?
I'm talking about Secret Empire and a lot of other things. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very interested to see where.
Because I don't know anybody that's happy with Marvel today. Do you? You?
I actually am.
Really?
I actually am.
Wow.
I actually
the first person I've ever met.
I was very this whole Hail Hydra Captain America thing blew my mind.
Yeah.
I was like, no, what are you doing?
Right.
But at the end of the day, if you've read the books and realize what Hydra stands for in this form, it's not the typical villain, Red Skull, we want to take over the world. It's like, no, we want to protect the world. Mm-hmm. We just want to do it in a totalitarian kind of way.
Right.
It's exactly what Captain America has always stood for.
Yep.
And now, spoiler alert, by the way, I'm going to say that now, because Secret Empire #3, if you haven't read it yet, huge thing, the Punisher's Hydra. He announced Hail Hydra. But who better? It makes perfect sense. Think of what the Punisher stands for.
Right.
And has no problem killing, obviously. If you saw the original Civil War, when Captain America brought him in, because Frank Castle adores Captain America and what he stood for. There's two villains, hey, these guys are villains, but they've come over to our side to help us fight. Just killed him right there. He goes, what are you doing? They're villains. Captain America proceeds to beat the crap out of Frank, and Frank never lifts an arm. Why? Because he admires him, and he's doing the right thing.
Right.
So, when Frank sees Captain America doing this, and he sees that they're executing villains, because they rounded up villains and executed them, and they rounded up heroes that were considered villains because they're not the Hydra way,
Right.
and killed them. That's exactly what Frank stands for. So it's just like, oh my God. Well, no, wait, that makes sense. What Nick Spencer is doing, I think, is actually really good. I think he's doing amazing work there. Him and Tom King, they're doing fantastic work. There is a second Steve Rogers that appeared at the end of issue 2. Curious to see where that goes.
Right.
I want to see this come out, and Marvel has already very quickly come out and said, look, we will not use the Cosmic Cube to fix this. We will not Band-Aid this. You're going to trust us when we say you're going to feel this for years.
Yeah.
Whenever this is all said and done, the ramifications will last for years. That's how I think books should go.
Yeah.
Now,
well, I agree. This is how old Marvel was, right? I mean, these things lasted forever and ever and ever. You know, when Phoenix died, she stayed dead for a long, long time. You know, same way for Gwen Stacy. You know, when I heard that Cap was going to be a Nazi, I was just like, you know, I'm not sure I would have gone there, but it's just, in the end, it's just a story that when they're done, they're going to go, okay, well, he's really not a Nazi. Right?
well,
or
and that's
Hydra, sorry.
And that's the thing. People are like, well, I'm glad you actually said that, because there actually is a major distinction, which I'm glad they brought it up in the actual movie, Captain America: First Avenger, with Red Skull when he
Right.
kind of defected. Hydra used the Nazis. They weren't Nazis.
Correct.
They were just using them because they thought they were going to win, which, in fact, in Secret Empire, they did win, and the Americans were like, oh, crap. Use the Comic Cube. We're gonna flip everything. Crap, we lost. Can't have that. So that's why Hydra picked that side, because they were winning, and
Right.
they did win. But America got a hold of the Cosmic Cube and flipped everything. But we're seeing Marvel has a lot of things that are paying off that started years ago, and like the reason Thor doesn't have the hammer anymore,
Right.
Or the fact that Captain America at the end of the Free Comic Book Day issue, Secret Empire Zero, picks up the hammer.
Yeah.
You're like, wait, he's Hydra. How is he worthy? So it makes you question these things. Like,
He's still Steve Rogers.
Is worthy based on belief?
Yeah.
Because he's had trouble picking it up before.
Right.
He's questioned his worthiness before, so he could pick it up because he's Steve Rogers. But it was hard.
Right.
This time he just walks up and goes, because he wholeheartedly believes in what he believes, what he's
Right.
doing is the right thing.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of people aren't happy with it.
Right.
But I think it's one of those, and again, the other thing with Marvel is you're treading on eggshells.
Right.
You've had a lot of miscues lately.
Yes.
Secret War took too long. You added books at the last minute.
Right.
Which, granted, Secret Wars I thought was good. But it took too long to come out, and you waited and waited and waited. You
Right.
missed all these deadlines. Then Civil War II, which was completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
Completely unnecessary.
Yep.
And it went nowhere.
Yeah.
It started out,
And they're really feeling it in the sales.
Yeah.
I don't know how if you follow sales at all.
Yes,
or
I
if
do.
Yeah, but their sales are really, really, really. Of course, I mean, kind of all across the board, not just Marvel.
Yeah.
It goes back to the crash of the '90s. It's not just Marvel. Everybody's feeling the crunch and the pain. You know, you didn't ask, but I think that until comics finds a way to fix the current distribution system, I think we're going to find ourselves in this kind of thing frequently.
I agree.
A friend of mine, who you met at MegaCon, you met him at FusionCon, Barry Gregory.
Yes.
One of the things he put it in terms like this, which you know, you think about it, you're like, oh yeah. So the problem with our current distribution system is that, like when you first started buying comics, right, and when I first started buying comics, they were kind of everywhere, right? You go to the grocery store, oh look, here's a comic, let me buy one. They were impulse buys, right? You're checking out, you got your Snicker bar, you got your candy, oh look, here's a Spider-Man, let me grab a Spider-Man, right? Today, they're a destination purchase.
Yes.
Meaning, if you're going to purchase a comic book, if your intent is to purchase a comic book, you have to get in a car and drive specifically to a comic book shop that sells comics. You can't just pick them up randomly anywhere. You know, I mean, bookstores will carry some graphic novels, but what's the history of, what's the future of bookstores? I mean, we're slowly losing our bookstores. And I think that, and that kind of all goes back to the distribution system, and we may be getting too deep for what they want to hear.
Oh no, please, absolutely.
But it goes to kind of the way our comics are distributed now, in that we've got to figure out how to fix that. How do we get it back into the broad public, not to say kill comic shops, because I love comic shops. I mean, who doesn't love comic shops? But we've got to find a way to get the broader populace buying comics.
Absolutely.
Put it in front of their face somehow.
Well, one of the other things that I've noticed is gone is the monthly subscription where you can have it sent to your home.
I used to have those from Marvel. They used to come folded up.
Yeah, it's like, it was great. Granted, you couldn't. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
They always keep, they were like,
And they were wrapped in a brown paper envelope like there was something,
yes.
you couldn't see.
Well, the worst part was my dad got another subscription monthly, and I grabbed
And you
the wrong
accidentally
one.
opened
I grabbed the wrong one
Oh,
one
look,
time.
my Marvel comic. Woo!
Oh, it's a week early. That's not mine.
That's yours, Dad.
Spider-Man doesn't even bend that way. Take that back.
That's Milo Manara's drawing her.
Yes, that is true. But
Drawing him.
so that's gone. But we have now web comics, and to me though, like, I guess I'm old school, and I don't want to take away from anybody because
Right.
I met some great people that work for Archie Comics, and she actually started as a web comic and still does her own web comic, Menage a Trois. She does her comic, and
That's her name, or is that her
that's the
comic
name. That's the name of the comic.
Okay.
But it just feels like I have to have the tactile, I guess.
Yeah.
I want to be able to flip through pages. I don't want to read it on my phone. I don't want to read it on a tablet.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. I like I do get some digital comics, particularly when I support Kickstarter projects and things like that. But I still like I like the paper. The part of the problem with webcomics, and I like webcomics, part of the problem, there are pros and cons of webcomics. The pros is that it doesn't really cost you anything to do, right? I mean, it's your time, so if you're the artist, you can do it, and you can do it in color, right? Where when you go to print something, you actually have to factor in the cost of color to your printing. That's why so many independent comics are black and white, because it costs almost twice as much to print color. But the problem is that how do you monetize it? How do you make money off of the web? And there are some who figured it out. Like, are you familiar with Phil Foglio's Girl Genius?
Yes.
So what he does, right? Excuse me. He sells ads on his page, or he used to. I don't know if he still does this or not. Girl Genius has been around for a long time, so I don't know if he's actually kind of changed his model. But one of the things that was cool about his model is that he sold ads on his page, and that sort of gave him a page rate, right? So he could sell, he could actually do the work, get paid to do it. And then at the end of the year, he would take all these pages that he had done, collect them up in a bound volume, take those to Comic Cons, and sell the trade, right? So that becomes sort of gravy at that point in time, because he's already been paid his page rate, through the ads.
Yeah, exactly.
And anything he does in the trades, so that somebody like me and you can come along and say, ooh, I want the trade, right? And the weird thing is, they sell. You think, well, why would you buy this? You can get everything online for free, right? You can read this whole thing. Yeah, but I want the trade. I want to, I want to hold it in my hands. Well,
I don't want an LED light blowing out my eyes.
Right.
That's the other thing. I can't stand that. It's just like, it's like a...
Well, and not to get too crude, but now that we have tablets and phones and everything, I used to always complain, I don't really want to take my laptop to the bathroom with me,
Yeah.
So I can take a trade pretty easily to the bathroom, but I didn't want to take a computer.
No. And I'm not reading a comic on something like this.
It's too little.
This is not happening.
Because you have to do all the
zoom up each panel.
Yeah.
And then when panels cross over, because that happens a lot, you're just like, ah!
Yeah.
So I'm not a big fan of it, but it does work. But that, to me, I almost feel like self-publishing books is going to be books, tactile books, is the way we to figure out how to get people back into reading comics.
Yeah.
I think it's the self-publishing ones, because right now, if you look at the top 10 of 2016, 9 out of the top 10 are independent books.
Yeah.
9 out of the 10. You look at the sales this year. Now, granted, DC Rebirth has been huge.
Right. It has.
And it's fantastic.
Yep.
I'm so happy with DC finally. Like, the New 52 was awful, I thought.
Finally, they've got a victory.
Yeah, they finally, it's just like, they're stepping in the right direction.
I'm so hoping Wonder Woman is good.
From what it's got 98% on Rotten
saw
Tomatoes.
That's exciting.
Which is pretty impressive.
Yes,
I think
it
it's
is.
one of the highest rated comic book movies of all time.
That's great.
Because I believe the one behind it was 97.
Really?
I think 98 makes it the highest up.
Wow.
So
I'm excited about that.
It's just it's going to be hard. I think it comes down to DC and Marvel need to step back. Granted, Rebirth is doing very well.
Mm-hmm.
And part of why it's doing well is because they got back to the legacy characters.
Right.
And although there's crossovers, it's not one giant event.
Right.
It has
about 50 books to get one story.
They're building to that.
Right.
They're building it with the Watchmen.
Yeah.
They're building it, but they're doing it correctly. Marvel, I think, once Secret Empire is over and what they're doing with Generations, I think they're on the same track.
Yeah.
But it's going to take them getting back on track,
Mm-hmm.
and then the independents to keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because they're really firing it up.
Yeah.
They're really
There's a lot
going.
of really good indie books out there, and you know, I'm sure you saw a bunch of them at MegaCon. You know, I tell people when they ask me, you know, what comics do I buy? I buy most of my stuff these days through Kickstarter. I support a lot of Kickstarter projects that come along. Sometimes they're by guys who, you know, you would know, oh, this guy did this Marvel project or this DC project, right? But they've got this creator-owned thing that they want to do, and so they go to Kickstarter in an effort to raise money. And you usually end up paying a little bit more than you would say at a convention. You know, you might pay $25 for the trade, but a year later you could probably get it for, you know, 15 from them at a convention. Yeah. But, you know, part of me says, oh, well, this is kind of a way to help make this happen. So I guess maybe that's the philanthropist in me. I'm not a philanthropist, but I guess maybe that's kind of that in me. But I support a lot of independent comics, and for the most part, I've been very happy with what I've done with ones I've supported.
That's awesome. Well, we have to wrap up. It's already been an hour. Already been an hour.
I was thinking it was like 20 minutes.
I know, it felt it's on. So I promise you all I will have Roland back as often as I can. Just a wealth of knowledge, great stuff. I do want to talk about Tiny and all the other stuff going on. I want to bring that up. So next week, we're going to be live. Comics and Hobbies, brand new Tyrone Square Mall, opening up their brand new shop there. We're going to have Roland and a bunch of other artists there. It's going to be amazing. So make sure you tune in next week. Until then, this is SuperBeard Vince Hoover with Roland Mann saying God bless everyone and thank you very much. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks a lot. Is there a power button? Open the